One of the things that are famous for known when they were in Mitzrayim is that they didn't change their names, the clothing, and the language they were talking. And we spoke previously about clothing and so on. I want to talk to you about the language. Why was so important for them not to change the language? Why did they speak ancient Hebrew or Hebrew at the time? Why didn't they just speak Egyptian to one another? And in order to understand that, maybe we should take a different approach altogether. What is a language when you speak? What happened when I speak? No, you sure anything? What happened?
Passing information.
No, okay, besides that, when I'm talking to you now, what happens? Besides, I'm passing you information, but let's say, for example, I'm just talking to you. Just talking, or singing. What happens? What comes out of my mouth? Not just words, it's also sounds, beats. So, for example, if you're going to speak in Spanish, the language has different beats, different spaces, different emphasis, right? If you speak, for example, French versus Chinese, or Arabic versus Russian, they have different beats. And that made me think the following. Every place has its own beat, its own rhythm, as it's being presented by the language we speak. So, for example, in Hebrew we have the concept of mil'el or mirra. Where do we put the emphasis? At the end of the word, at the beginning of the word. And that's very much into the place that we had in the Middle East. So what happens to us when we speak the language? When we speak the language, let me just pause 1 second. Since we are not just people, we need to understand that we are also souls, a spiritual quality or entity inside of us. You know, it's always a struggle between my neshama, my soul, and my body. Sometimes I feel the body wins, right? Because, you know, it's hurting. But really, who am I? When I'm talking to you now, who is really talking? Is this my body talking? Or is it my soul talking? When I say my body, that refers to the sense that something belongs to someone, right? My body, my head, or should I say my car? If I say my car, what does it mean? It means that the car belongs to me. If I say my body or my head, who is me that I'm talking to that belongs to? The neshama, the soul, speaks from ourselves inside. So when I speak the language, when I speak Hebrew, because of the sound that comes out from that, it does something very, very interesting. It brings us back a memory. It makes us not forget where we came from. So when you speak language, you speak Hebrew, it reminds you of the place in which we came from, which is Israel, the land of Israel. If you know anything about colonialism and so on and so forth, the first thing that a nation tries to do is to erase the memory of the people that are there is by forcing them to speak a different language. For example, one of the things that the Romans forbidden us to do is to speak Hebrew. And then we came along with this, or the Assyrians, the Greeks. So we start talking the language to the point that we forgot to speak Hebrew. We forgot. And then we lost our identity while we were in Israel. Something very common that happened, I don't know if you know about this, about American history. There were many institutions that were established by the American government The most famous one is in Carlisle, Pennsylvania. And there was the Carlisle School for Indians, for Native Americans, or whatever you call it today, in which they would take the Indian kids, and they would ship them to the schools to separate them away from their parents, from the family, from the tribe, and they would force them to speak in English. And if they spoke to one another in whatever language they were talking, you know, a Lakota would speak to a Lakota in English, and a Navajo would speak to a Navajo, you know, friends like this, they will take their mouth and they'll wash it with soap, because you were not allowed to speak that language. Because by me forcing you not to speak your language, I'm robbing you of your culture. I'm robbing you of your identity. Because it's always a reminder of who you are and who you were and where you came from. So to erase the concept of the savage from the Indians and to try to make them into a more civilized person, they erased the language. I mean, to the point today that I'm sure some people speak Native American languages, whichever tribe they are, but to most part of it, it's completely gone. They didn't preserve it in terms of, maybe besides the Cherokees that developed their own alphabet, but it's very difficult not to pass it on. So you have many Native American kids that don't speak a word of their tribe. And there were many kids like this, many tribes like that. And yes, together with that, there are many Jewish kids who don't speak Hebrew. And it is a problem. I think that you tell me, Rabbi, it's a hypocrite, you're talking to us in English, but I'm trying to make you understand. I should speak to you in Hebrew, but I'm trying to make you understand what I'm saying so you can actually try to apply it. You need to become very proficient, very comfortable with your own language, with Hebrew. Speak Hebrew. Read. Because that will make you not forget who you are and where you came from. It's tapping into the past, into the beat of the place. It's very interesting. I think if we do some kind of a research to show you how the music, for example, of Israel, the beginning, if you're talking about, let's say, the 40s and the 50s, an Israeli radio, all you heard is maybe a person sitting with an accordion or with a piano or some kind of cappella in a choir or something like this. There was no music. And then we have today that we are tapping into, because of that, and mainly because of the Sfaradim, we're tapping into the beat of the place. So a lot of people in Israel recreate Israeli music or local music, whether it's Shlomo Bar from Berat TV or Ehud Banai, all these people, they create, or Yair Dalal, they're recreating music that it's associated with the place. Because, listen, I love blues, I love jazz, I love opera, but that's not local to Israel. And it's so funny, because in America, I could listen to bluegrass. I love bluegrass. I love blues. I love country. But I go to Israel, I can't listen to that music. I can't listen. It feels so empty in Israel. It's the tune of the place. It's the rhythm of the place. So all the songs, if I have let's say a playlist that I listen to in America, I go to Israel, I can't listen to the music there. It just feels foreign to me. Maybe because I'm more sensitive or became more sensitive. But it's the same thing to you. So it's so sad to me when you go to Israel and people all of a sudden speak in English and using English instead of using Hebrew. It's pathetically stupid. Now, if you want to know, if you always wonder why it's easier to bring a Sephardi back to be Choser B'Teshuvah, to keep the mitzvot than an Ashkenazi, well, I'll tell you this. I think the secret is there. Because the Sfaradim spoke more Hebrew and yet they spoke languages that are more local. So in a way, they did not completely lose the spiritual connection, the beat to the place. Many of the Ashkenazi people who left, I mean, you could see it by the Ashkenazi pronunciation, that it's based more on the Mil'el, which is more Eastern European, Anglo-Saxon, Germanic pronunciation, rather than Semitic pronunciation. For whatever reason, it's more difficult to do that. So it's not a matter of being racist or this and that, it's just a matter of the language. So for me, when you have somebody in Israel speaking Yiddish, or even for that matter speaking Ladino, or speaking whatever, it's very, very sad. Because you brought that mentality of exile into Israel, which you get rid of it. Immerse yourself in Israeli, culture. Because that's something that is happening now, and you can contribute, bringing back to what it was, to the point that, for example, if we are talking about Shirat HaLeviim, the Levites singing in Bet HaMikdash, I'm guaranteeing you, it did not sound like an opera. By all means. Because that beat belongs to Europe. That logical beat, whatever is in music, the fourths and whatever they call like this. In the Middle East, it's sometimes they have the asymmetrical, they have the makam, it's asymmetrical beats. The emphasis is always usually is on the first one. Boom, dum, 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 dum. Always on the first one. Because that's how they speak, that's the rhythm of the place. So before we get completely lost, and that's by the way how you get lost. So if you understand now, you take all this, and now you apply it to the concept of what we learned in the Midrash, that they were redeemed because they didn't change the clothing, which is their own external identity, the name, which is their personal identity, and the language, which is the spiritual identity. You understand? So from here we get something new. Most likely, those who changed their names, changed their clothing, and abandoned their language, these are the people who stayed there, were not redeemed. Israel is a bridge. It's between East and West. And that's the power of Israel, the power of the people who live in Israel. That's why if a person controls that land, it controls the bridge between East and West. That's why it always fights, it always, battles over the small territory, which is like the size of New Jersey. Because it controls everything. So before we get completely disappear and swallowed into whatever culture we're in, surrounded by, let's try to make one last effort and learn Hebrew. And I will tell you, listen, even if it starts with listening to Hebrew songs. Start with music. It's easier for you to sing a song many times than actually to speak. So sing. That's why it's important also to sing on Shabbat. When you sing on Shabbat, imagine you sing in the Shir Da'or Ikra, right? It's a song that it's ancient. It's by a Spanish guy. It's almost 1,000 years old. Not only that it's the joy, but it also is something else. You connect the Shabbat with your past, you connect the Shabbat with yourself, you connect yourself with your past. So let's start with songs. Let's start with this music. Let's start with speaking Hebrew more to one another. Let's say, for example, try to, and if you can, start talking or thinking to yourself in English, in Hebrew. And for me, it's so sad when you have people in Israel and they're looking for Anglo communities. Where are you moving? I'm moving to Bet Shemesh, or I'm moving to Ra'anana. Why? Because there are more Anglos there. I mean, if you wanted Anglos, you didn't have to go to Israel. All you got to do is stay in the Five Towns or whatever you are. Stay over there in Flatbush. You didn't have to go to Israel to be among Americans. It's a mistake. You should be among the people of the land. Secular and not secular alike. Again, I'll tell you, if your observance can only survive when you are surrounded in cotton balls, at the end you're going to be surrounded by mothballs. It's going to die. Go outside. Go meet Israelis. Speak. interact, connect to the land, walk the land, and so on and so forth. Connect with who you are in all aspects. Again, so pay attention to your clothing. Make sure it's a Jewish clothing. Make sure you wear a nice talit. A talit is something that we always forget. People will buy $1,000 suits, if not more. But yet the talit is they don't even have it. They borrow one from shul. They'll drive a $180,000 Porsche, but they get the talit from shul. Make sure your talit is clean. Make sure your tzitziot are nice. Buy the best tzitziot you can. That starts with your Jewish identity. Connect to your Jewish identity. Listen to Jewish music. Find some good old Israeli songs, but not the ones that sounds like a Russian, Bolshevik music. Even current Israel, if you want, I'll give you a playlist later on to listen to. Something like that. Get in touch with that. And even more than that, and more important, start learning and speaking the language the best of your ability. Any connection, even if it's a little connection, is better than no connection. It's the same thing like money. What's better, to have no money or to have little money? Well, little money because it's better than nothing. So the same thing here. Start developing a connection to your place, and hopefully when this whole COVID balloon is going to go, maybe I still did not give hope, and maybe we can make a whole yeshiva trip together, and then we can connect to the land on a totally different level. So until then, boys and girls, you have a lot of work to do. Have a great day.